Number 5. Paige Vanzant is the number 9th ranked strawweight in the UFC. She made a UFC debut against Kaylin Curran at UFC Fight Night 57, where she won the fight by TKO in the first round. She next successfully defeated Felice Herrig and Alex Chambers. Many had thought that the UFC were giving her easy opponents and were building too much hype around her. She next was scheduled to face Joanne Calderwood at UFC Fight Night 80. An injury would force Joanne Calderwood out of her fight. The highly talented Rose Namajunas stepped in and faced Paige Vanzant, which many considered it would be a true test for her. In the fight, Paige Vanzant lost by submission via a rear naked choke in the 5th round. She next took a break from fighting and appeared on Dancing with the Stars, where she came 2nd place in the finals. She made a return to the octagon and faced Bec Rawlings at UFC on Fox 21, where she knocked Bec Rawlings out with a switch kick in the 2nd round. She recently faced Michelle Waterson at UFC on Fox 22, where she was choked unconscious in the 1st round. She is still very young in the sport and has time to work on her weaknesses. She is a very talented young fighter who has the potential to hold the UFC belt one day. Number 4. Sage Northcutt fights in both the UFC welterweight and lightweight division. He made his UFC debut at the age of 19 against Francisco Trevino at UFC 192. In the fight, Sage Northcutt threw a barrage of strikes early in the 1st round, finishing the fight by TKO. He next faced Cody Pfister at UFC Fight Night 80, where he won the fight by a guillotine choke in the 2nd round. With 2 successful fights in the UFC, many had thought that the UFC was giving too much attention to the young fighter, in which he even received hate and call-outs from his fellow UFC fighters. He next fought Brian Barberina at UFC on Fox 18, where he lost the fight by submission via an arm triangle in the 2nd round. He next successfully defeated Enrique Marin by a unanimous decision at UFC 200. He recently faced Mickey Gall at UFC on Fox 22, where he lost the fight by submission via a rear naked choke in the 2nd round. He is also very young in the sport and has time to work on his overall game. He is a great striker who has all the tools to challenge for the title in the future. Number 3. Rafael dos Anjos is the number 4th ranked lightweight in the UFC. He became the UFC lightweight champion after putting a one-side beating on Anthony Pettis, winning the fight by a unanimous decision at UFC 185. He next successfully defended his title against Donald Cerrone at UFC on Fox 17, where he won the fight by TKO in the 1st round. He had accomplished his goal of holding a UFC title and had looked terrifying inside the octagon. Many had thought that it was the start of a new era and that he would be a long-reigning UFC lightweight champion, but that wasn't the case. He next was scheduled to defend his title against Conor McGregor at UFC 196. Just 2 weeks before UFC 196, it was announced that Rafael dos Anjos had injured his foot. After successfully recovering from his injury, he next faced Eddie Alvarez at UFC Fight Night 90, where he lost the fight by TKO in the 1st round, losing his title. He recently faced Tony Ferguson at the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 3 finale, where he lost the fight by a unanimous decision. He is now on a 2-fight losing streak, and it will be interesting to see how he makes his comeback. Number 2. Johny Hendricks is the number 6th ranked welterweight fighter in the UFC. He put together a 6-fight winning streak and earned himself a title shot against then UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre at UFC 167. In a close back and forth fight, George St. Pierre was given the split decision victory, where many had thought Johny Hendricks had won the fight. GSP wanted to take a break from the sport and vacated the UFC welterweight title. Johny Hendricks faced number 1 contender Robbie Lawler for the vacant UFC welterweight title at UFC 171, where he won the fight by a unanimous decision, becoming the new UFC welterweight champion of the world. He next defended his title against Robbie Lawler again at UFC 181, where he lost the fight by split decision, losing his world title. He next successfully defeated Matt Brown by a one-sided unanimous decision at UFC 185. Many had thought that this would be the start of a run towards the title, but that didn't work out as people would have thought. In early 2016, he faced Stephen Thompson at UFC Fight Night 82, where he lost the fight by TKO in the 1st round, marking the first time he was ever finished in his career. He next would lose again to Kelvin Gastelum by a unanimous decision at UFC 200. He is now on a 2-fight losing streak and is too far away from title contention. He is a talented fighter and needs to make drastic changes in his training camps in order to make a run again towards the title. Number 1. Holly Holm is the number 4th ranked bantamweight fighter in the UFC. She came into the UFC with an undefeated record of 7-0 with championships held in both kickboxing and boxing. She made a UFC debut against Raquel Pennington at UFC 184, where she won the fight by a split decision. She next defeated Marianne Renault by a unanimous decision at UFC Fight Night 71 and was given the next title shot against then UFC bantamweight champion Ronda Rousey at UFC 193. Ronda Rousey had destroyed all of her opponents with ease and had looked unstoppable. Many had thought that the same would happen to Holly Holm, but that wasn't the case. In the fight, Holly Holm used her distance to land strikes, avoiding Ronda Rousey's high-level judo. Holly Holm eventually knocked out Ronda Rousey in the 2nd round, sending shockwaves across the whole world. Many had thought that the new champion would remain dominant and would go on a successful run, but that wasn't the case. Her first title defense was against then number 1 contender Miesha Tate at UFC 196. In the fight, she was choked unconscious in the 5th round. She next faced rising bantamweight contender Valentina Shevchenko at UFC on Fox 20, where she lost the fight by a unanimous decision. With the 2-fight losing streak, she has moved quite far away from title contention. It was recently announced by the UFC that they will be creating a women's featherweight division, and that Holly Holm's next fight will be for the vacant UFC women's featherweight title against Jaraine de Randamie at UFC 208. In this fight, we will see what changes Holly Holm has made to her game and how she will bounce back from them 2 losses.